Breaking news, the House Intelligence Committee revealing plans for more testimony by Michael Cohen and new testimony by Trump Tower Moscow promoter Felix Sater. Also breaking, the New York Times reporting that President Trump ordered his chief of staff to grant his son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner a top secret security clearance last year. The New York Times says Mr. Trump overruled concerns expressed by intelligence officials and the top White House lawyer. Let's talk about all of this and more with the former director of national intelligence, General James Clapper. He's now a CNN national security analyst. General Clapper, thanks for coming in. You've had a chance to look at this New York Times story. What's your reaction?
Well, it is, as they say in the security business, not a practice dangerous to security to do that when there is the potential for leverage to be exerted by a foreign power or a foreign adversary. That is a dangerous practice. Well, and it sets a very bad example.
Well, you worked in the U.S. intelligence community for decades. Do you remember a time where a president of the United States, if this New York Times report is true, ordered someone, a relative in this particular case, to get top secret security clearances?
I don't. I know of no prior case.
What's the risk?
Well, the risk is if there is concern about foreign entanglements, where a foreign power, perhaps in this case China, could exert leverage because of financial entanglements and then influence or gain access. That's again a risky practice, and it does set a terrible example for the rest of the security community. We
did get a statement from Peter Merjanian, spokesman for Abby Lowell, who's the personal attorney of Jared Kushner. I'll read it. In 2018, White House and security clearance officials affirmed that Mr. Kushner's security clearance was handled in the regular process with no pressure from anyone. That was conveyed to the media at the time, and news stories, if accurate, do not change what was affirmed at the time. You want to respond to that?
Well, there's a conflict there, it seems to me, from between that statement and what the New York Times is reporting.
Yeah, well, let's see what's going on. If the New York Times report is accurate, and they say they have 4 people involved who gave them this information. You're sitting here next to me. The President of the United States, if it's true, personally ordered the top secret security clearance for his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. But we remember all those threats he was making against you and others to remove, to lose your own top secret security clearances. What, if anything, has ever happened on that?
As far as I know, nothing.
Do you still have top secret security clearances?
As far as I know.
But have you used those? Have you asked anyone to gather that kind of sensitive information?
No.
No. So you wouldn't know if it would be denied to you, since there hasn't been a need for you to get it.
I'm sure they would tell me, and I do something about my badge or informing me what my obligations are by virtue of being debriefed, and I've never gone through that.
So if your security clearances were revoked, they would have to tell you that?
Well, yeah, I would hope so.
But nobody has said anything to you. Let's talk about Michael Cohen's testimony. Cohen said he had no evidence to back up his claims that the president was given advance knowledge of WikiLeaks email and the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with the Russians on the question of collusion. Do you think Cohen's testimony was valuable?
I actually thought he was credible and compelling, and the reason is that why on earth would he have any incentive to lie under oath again and thereby risk extending his prison term? So to me, he had every incentive to be truthful.
Yeah.
So I take it at face value what he said. Now, the fact that he doesn't have he doesn't possess any other documentary or electronic proof of the phone call, there are other ways to determine whether that actually happened or not.
So presumably, federal prosecutors, whether it's special counsel or the Southern District of New York, they have access to all sorts of information that he might not even have information.
Well, exactly, like access to phone company records, for example.
Did the president do the right thing in Hanoi, Vietnam, when he abruptly left? There was no agreement with Kim Jong-un. You've been involved in U.S.-North Korea relations for many years.
Actually, to his credit, I think he did do the right thing. I think no deal is better than a bad deal. I was very concerned, Wolf, at the outset, that in order to generate a counter distraction from the Cohen testimony, that he might make a concession, ill-advised concession, such as agreeing to pull troops off the peninsula. So in this case, I think no deal is better than a bad deal.
I want you to listen to what the president said. He was asked at a news conference before leaving Hanoi if he confronted Kim Jong-un on the death of the American student Otto Warmbier, and he said this. Listen.
I did speak to him. He felt very badly. But he knew the case very well, but he knew it later. And, you know, you got a lot of people, a big country, a lot of people. And in those prisons and those camps, you have a lot of people. And some really bad things happened to Otto. Some really, really bad things.
Why are you willing
to
call
him?
But
he tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word.
I will take him at his word. What's your reaction to that?
Well, this is unfortunately a pattern that seems to have emerged with President Trump in accepting the word of autocrats like Kim Jong-un. And I thought, first of all, whenever the North Koreans have U.S. hostages, it's only 2 or 3 at a time. That's about the most they've ever had. They're well aware of their status. And and Kim Jong-un knew exactly what was going on with Otto Warmbier. And the other thing that really bothered me about this is a terribly insensitive thing to say for the parents to hear.
The parents of Otto Warmbier. And,
exactly.
You know, obviously very, very sad. He was a young, 22-year-old University of Virginia student who happened to be sightseeing
for stealing a poster
in North Korea. Yeah, stealing a poster, spent a year, and comes home and he's dead. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Wolf.
James Clapper, the former Director of National Intelligence for the United States.
Let's turn to Chris Wallace now, anchor of Fox News Sunday. Where do we go with this story, and where does it go from here, Chris?
You're talking about the Kushner security story? Mm-hmm. Well, it is a subject that the House Democrats were already planning to investigate, the whole question of how security clearances have been given out by the Trump White House. According to the New York Times, there were contemporaneous memos because they were so upset that reportedly the president ordered them to give this top-secret clearance to Kushner, that both the then Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and the then White House counsel, Donald McGahn, wrote down memorandums stating that they had opposed this and the president had ordered them to do it. And I would think that there's probably a congressional subpoena in their future, probably in the House Oversight Committee, much like Michael Cohen, to testify as to whether or not it's true.
We just spoke to Kellyanne Conway, getting fresh White House reaction. She was at CPAC. Little hard to hear, but we wanted to get fresh White House reaction to this story this morning. Here's how she responded, Chris.
We don't discuss security clearances. I'm not even going to discuss my own. But I will tell you that the president has the absolute right to do what was described, but we're not going to discuss that. I will tell you, as these stories are breaking, Jared Kushner was over in the Middle East working on behalf of the president, on behalf of this country.
But of course, the left is quick to point out, or any critics of this administration, that we have heard the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, comment on her husband's security clearance, saying that the president was not involved, and the president himself has said he wasn't involved. So they commented in the past on this. Now the White House response is that there is no response.
I would have to call what Kellyanne Conway said there a classic non-denial denial. When she says we don't talk about this, as you point out quite rightly, Sandra, they have talked about it in the past. If it were false, if in fact the president hadn't been involved, I can't imagine they wouldn't say that. They have no qualms about saying when news is fake, when reporting they think is inaccurate. They're not saying that about this story, so I think that speaks for itself.
I mean